ladies and gentlemen, welcome the moderator of the next session, Vasil Hudak.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon from Bratislava, from this wonderful event that GLOBSEC is hosting here already since yesterday. I think it's a unique event because we are not only virtually connected, but we have over 200 participants who are here, who are in Bratislava, participating in different parts of GLOBSEC event, GLOBSEC forum. And I think it shows that hopefully the pandemic is finishing and we are beginning to meet in person and to be together and be able to discuss different issues directly in person. So wonderful to be in charge and to introduce and chair this session on winners and losers of the pandemic. We'll have about 45 minutes to discuss this important topic. I think there are many discussions already about who are the winners, who are the losers, and what to do about both of them. We have three panelists who are with us virtually from different parts of the world. I will introduce them now. Angel Gurria, former Secretary General of OECD. Angel, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Are you still in Paris?
No, I'm in Mexico now.
Mexico, okay, back home.
Pretty early.
Great, thank you. Angel, he has been coming to different GLOBSEC events, including Tatra Summit for several years, and is a great friend of Slovakia, of Europe. And thank you so much for all that you have done at the OECD. Really major work. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second panelist is Harry Broadman, a partner and chair, Emerging Markets Practice, Berkeley Research Group, and faculty member of Johns Hopkins University. Harry, welcome. Greetings to Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much, Vasil. Great to see you.
I think we know each other since you worked at the World Bank and many other institutions. So great to have you, at least virtually, in Bratislava. And the third one, I don't think we need to really introduce too much. I call him Mr. Europe, because he does represent Europe from different sides, but I mean, good part of Europe. Alex Stup, Director, School of Transatlantic Governance, European University Institute, joining us from Florence. Alex, good afternoon.
Thanks, Vasil. Good afternoon. Actually joining you from Finland, just got back from Florence a couple nights ago. And if I sort of stop and shout at some stage, it's because Finland will have just scored a goal against Russia. We're 20 minutes into the match and we started by scoring in the 3rd minute, but this stupid VAR system claimed that it was offside. It wasn't. But in any case, congratulations to Slovakia for winning their first match.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes. Unfortunately, digitalization, including in soccer, has some negative consequences. But Alex, having been Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Finance Minister, Vice President of the European Investment Bank, where we used to sit together at these never-ending meetings, he's the person who has a lot to say about both winners and losers of pandemic. So thank you, of course, all those who are here in the audience, in person, in Bratislava. Thank you for joining this session. And we have many others who are joining us virtually, globally, from different parts of the world. I would just like to remind all of us, all of you, that it is possible to ask questions during the session. There are 3 ways how to do it. Those who are in the room, just please raise your hand, and when I give you the floor, please come to the microphone, which is right here. There is also a possibility to ask questions online via GLOBSEC application called and through Slido system. And the third one is connecting via Zoom to the virtual studio. Actually, we already have a question from Argentina, so close to Mexico, where Angel is now. I would like to actually test this system of questions first.
Only about 10,000 kilometers away.
For us from Europe, it seems like it's all one big continent, very close to each other. But yes, thank you for reminding of the distances. So before I ask each of the panelists to give their introductory remarks, I would like to test the system itself. And there is one question which would be posed by Slido, and we can test the answers. I think the question could be on the screen soon. Yes, so the question is, will our lives after the pandemic be A, better or worse? So those who are on Slido, please check either A or B. It'll be interesting to see what the feeling of the audience, both here but also internationally, what it is, whether our lives will be influenced in a better way. Better, good. 88% better, that's great. Very optimistic audience we have today, which is wonderful. I think it's also because Finland is going to win, so everybody is in an optimistic mood. But let's go now to the panelists themselves and to the introductory remarks. There are basically two things which were put in front of the panelists and the session itself. Two issues we would like to discuss in particular, but of course we can go much broader. One question is, who are those winners and losers of pandemic? Winners and losers both in the context of international environment, global community, but also in terms of countries themselves and within the countries themselves, as well as economic sectors. So kind of defining who are those winners and losers. And the second one is how can we help the winners and, or rather support the winners, and how can we help losers? So maybe those would be the types of questions in general, but of course up to you, our friends on the panel, to describe as you want. So I would like to start with Angel. Mr. Guria, if you could maybe start with your perspective, and if we could keep the remarks to 5-7 minutes, that would be appreciated.
Well, I was quite intrigued by the title, because winners and losers looks like it's a zero-sum game. And there are opportunities, or there are occasions in the world, in history, where you have net losses, and I think this is one of them. This is a truly a global problem. It's much more global than the global financial crisis of the 2008-2009. Even the most remote island in the world has not been spared, and that also creates a lot of challenges for the future. When you have 4 million deaths, or close to 4 million deaths, you had a large contraction in the world economy, 3.5% last year. We are looking at a 6% growth for the world economy in 2021, and perhaps 4 to 5% in 2022. So we're looking at a recovery, but basically the scars of the pandemic will be with us for much longer, even after we beat the pandemic, if that is at all possible in the next few years. The scars of this impact in terms of trade, in terms of investment, in terms of jobs, in terms of poverty, and also in terms of the future of work. There are some things which we are still processing and we're still working on, and we don't know how that will evolve. But what is important is that as we build forward better, that we make sure that this reconstruction, rebuilding is greener, that it is more equal in the sense of not producing as many inequalities as the pre-pandemic world had, which were widening now we have to move towards a less inequalities, not only for moral and ethical reasons, but also for economic reasons and political reasons. And of course, it has to be more resilient in the sense of preparing better for the next shock, which we know will come. We don't know exactly when or in what form. But I would say that there are not too many winners here. You do have a few companies that made a lot of money in the process. But you have to ask even if those companies, given what's going to happen, the slowdown, etc., are going to continue to be winners in net terms. I would say this was a net loss for the world. And my greatest single concern now is precisely that we are doing both the recovery and the vaccination process, as well as this green and the equal recovery and the resilient recovery in very clearly two speeds. The developed world is doing much better, much faster. The developing world still waiting. And in some cases, like vaccination, very, very dramatic differences. Promising that these 1 billion vaccines that just happened a few days ago at the G7, very promising. A set of promising commitments by the largest economies in the world. But I think today, when we take stock of the impact of the pandemic, I would say mostly losers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel. I mean, it's kind of tough assessment of the pandemic itself, more on the probably negative side. It will be interesting to hear from the others whether there are positive aspects of the pandemic which might actually lead to some positive developments in the world. So I would go to Harry Broadman. How do you see the issue of winners, losers, including, and I know this has been your focus of your research and attention going back to the World Bank in terms of also in-country developments and differentiation in terms of sectors, but also regional inequalities within the countries. So please, Harry.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say I do agree with Angel that we are all worse off as a result of this pandemic. This is not like the financial crisis. Obviously, in the financial crisis, some scars were left. In this case, there are probably different types of scars and long-lasting in terms of the economies, both of the advanced countries and the emerging markets. I would say, I would make a couple of points. One, the pandemic, any disturbance, economic disturbance, health disturbance is going to produce, in effect, winners and losers. However, if we think about the pandemic as a one-time crisis, hopefully, it's important to distinguish between changes that were already underway, in other words, structural changes, and the cyclical changes, if you will, that were engendered by the pandemic. And so when we think about industries and countries, how have they been affected as we hopefully come out of this? One of the obvious changes is the way that people work and the way that the services industries are going to be structured going forward. And when you think about shopping, as we all know, going to a store now to buy certain things, not all things, you might well just do this by your desk and wait for a company to deliver the goods. So there's differences, ways in work. The question, though, is, how will certain people of different incomes be able to do that? How much access do they have to the services infrastructure? Will they be the ones that need to go to the stores, for instance, or go to the factories? I think the other question is when you think about structural changes that were already underway, think about artificial intelligence and digitalization. And so when we think about the logistics industry or the shipping industry, there were already changes in the works, except for delivery of certain goods at the last mile, where shipping and logistics was already becoming digitalized and more animated, if you will. And that is a trend that is going to be accelerated as a result of the pandemic. When we think in terms of the countries, the advanced countries, particularly because they have more resilient health systems and more resilient economies, they're certainly coming out of this, at least according to the latest forecasts. They're beginning to rebound, obviously. Whether that rebound will be permanent and lasting in terms of robust growth for several years to come, I think is an open question. And that brings me to the other part of the world, the emerging markets and the poor countries, which I think are decidedly much worse off, both for the mortality issues that Angel raises that we're already concerned about and knowledgeable of, but how will they begin to restructure their workplaces? How will they begin to restructure how they trade with not just each other, but with other countries of the world? And I think net, I think populations in the emerging markets will be much worse off as a result of the pandemic. I do think that we need to emphasize that this is a work in progress, that yes, we appear to be coming out of the pandemic, but I think it's really quite premature for those of us who are on the front lines, at least thinking about this from an economics perspective, to believe that it's over. It may be over for the wealthy countries, but it's certainly not over for the vast population of the planet. And to the extent that those other countries are not vaccinated, there is not sufficient herd immunity within the countries, the emerging markets, that means that all of us around the world are not going to enjoy any kind of herd immunity if we believe that the globalized economy is here to stay, which I think it is. But it does raise the question about whether or not there will be a splitting, if you will, a decoupling from the advanced countries and the emerging markets in terms of economic growth. For the last 2 decades, the GDP growth, the rate of GDP growth, real terms in emerging markets really was about twice the rate of GDP growth in real terms of the advanced economies, regardless of the business cycle. That is shown in the data very clearly. I think now the question before us is whether there's going to be a structural shift in that, whether or not growth in emerging markets, put aside China, I'm talking about the other emerging markets, and put aside India, whether or not their growth will be downgraded significantly, and whether there will be a structural split between the poor and the wealthy countries. So those, I think, when I think about the winners and the losers, so to speak, of the pandemic, that's the way I think about things. And I think it's really a decidedly mixed picture, and we are not out of the woods yet by a long stretch in my view.
Thank you very much, Harry. I think you are certainly right that it is a mixed picture in terms of the recovery. The recovery is very uneven. I think when I go to the streets of Bratislava, but I live in Prague. I was last week in Budapest. I can see many people outside. There is a kind of good spirit that we are getting to this recovery phase, and people can enjoy more the freedom and being outside. So I feel a lot of optimism, plus some numbers which are coming out of the economic situation in the countries of, at least of the European Union, show to the positive evolution and very strong recovery. But at the same time, as you mentioned, in the developing emerging markets, the picture is quite different. So this issue of decoupling, as you mentioned, Harry, is a real one, and the question is how to address it. But let's go to Alex. How do you see this issue of winners and losers, and what's your point of view?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and thanks to Angel and Harry for their outlines. I agree with a lot of it, but I'll probably put a slightly more positive spin to the whole package. And let me phrase it like this. I think probably the more relevant question than winners and losers is, what did we learn? And I think this is then going to determine whether you're a winner or a loser in this overall situation. And in academia, you never give black and white answers. Every answer to every question is, well, it depends. So it depends. I mean, first observation, much like was said earlier, this is a global crisis. And in many ways, it's a crisis that, from a health perspective, hit us symmetrically. In other words, we are all equally touched by the virus in one way or another. There's no defense mechanism as such. But then in terms of the actual impact and how it hit us globally, regionally and otherwise, it is of course very asymmetrical. I think this crisis is transnational and cross-border. And I think what basically we need to try to assess and understand is three elements of it: the political, the economic, and the health perspective. And if I wind those, I think a lot of political leaders at the moment, they understand that they will be judged on the basis of three criteria in how they have managed this pandemic. Number one is very morbid. It's the number of dead. It can either be, counted by per capita or accrued casualties. So in the United States, just today or yesterday, I think it surpassed the figure of 600,000 casualties to the pandemic. The number two criteria is the rollout of the vaccines. And I fully understand that I'm looking at this now from a Western developing country perspective, and perhaps a little bit sort of internally of how the rollout has happened in Europe, how it's happened in the UK and the US, and how then the developing world is able to export the vaccines, as Harry mentioned earlier in the aftermath of the G7 meeting. The third criteria is going to be economic. In other words, how quickly do you recover from the impact of the pandemic? Because of course the economic impact was radically different from the one that Vasil and I and many others saw during the financial crisis and the euro crisis, because this was both a supply and a demand side crisis. And here we then come to basically lessons learned. Now, the reason I fall onto the, if this was a really binary question, did we win or lose on this? The reason I say that we will most probably win is the following. Number one, the biggest winner in this is science. I think, was it not for CRISPR technology as put forward and then rewarded by Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier with the Nobel Prize of CRISPR technology, we would have not gotten this vaccine so fast. So, I'm really, really impressed what science was able to do, and also what Big Pharma was able to produce in terms of vaccines. The second winner in this, I think, is actually global cooperation. To a certain extent, a lot of political leaders who had some nationalistic tendencies, I'm not saying that they haven't gone away, realized that, on this one, we need to cooperate. Even, of course, we were quite lucky in the sense that in the United States, there was a switch from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. So that sort of accelerated the idea of cooperation, the WHO, et cetera, et cetera. And actually today, the Commission has come out with 10 points or 10 lessons learned from the pandemic, which we can discuss, but they're sort of quite global lessons, if you will. A third one is a bit of a soft one. I think this has been a collective human experience. We as human beings understand each other from all around the world differently as a result of this pandemic, because we understand what a pandemic means, how it can hit all of us in no matter where we are. And in that sense, there's a collective experience which goes beyond the sort of more traditional identity or national collective experience. And I think that's an important one. The two other winners of this crisis, albeit short term, One is climate, and the reason I say this is I just read Bill Gates' latest book on the climate crisis, where he says that in order for us to solve the climate crisis, we need to reduce the greenhouse emissions per annum. Right now, there are 51 billion tons. Actually, we need to reduce them to zero, so there's a long work ahead. But the estimate that we have seen is that the COVID year brought it already down to 47 billion tons. So I think this was a good awareness type. And then finally, for us information managers who sit in different capitals around the world in front of screens and put numbers and letters together and express them either on video or in writing or in speech or however it might be. I mean, the future work is different. I know, Vasil, you like to travel a lot, right? But, to be honest, you'll have less of an argument to take every trip in the future. A lot of our future work is going to be behind the screen, especially in the line of work that we do, for better or for worse. Having said that, I do miss the social contact as well. So this is my take on the pandemic, perhaps a tad more optimistic than that of Harry and Angel.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Yes, I do like to travel because I like meeting people. On the other hand, I have to say that during the pandemic and lockdown, my wife was very happy because we were, after a long time, together as a family, and it was quite a very nice experience. So it's all relevant. Anyway, I would like to combine some questions.
My wife was very happy at the beginning, and now she says, "Well, what you find something to do?" So it's a question of relative terms. So.
Yeah. My wife has a loud spouse problem.
Yeah. What does it mean in Finland?
Well, it means that when I have these AirPods in, and she's having her Zoom in the other meeting, she comes to the door and says, "Shh."
Great. I can understand that. But Angel, maybe a question to you, and I would like to combine some questions which are coming through Slido, and one is actually coming from Mexico, from your home country, Angel, and it says it's coming from Mauricio Meshulam, and says a special hello from Mexico to Mr. Guria. You can actually see it on the screen. In countries as ours and most of the world, poverty and inequality are increasing severely. Why you feel will be better? I think it's more a reaction to the poll which we did at the very beginning, which showed that most of the people are optimistic, at least those who are connected to this session, over 80%. But I think Angel, what you described was actually much more sobering evaluation of the impact of pandemic. But if you want to respond to Mauricio from Mexico.
Yes, I think what he needed was the third, a C item, because it was binary. It was better or it was worse. And the C one depended a lot on what Harry mentioned, which is, what do we do about these challenges today? Are we going to build greener? Well, we're not doing a great job. We have spent about 16 trillion, which is about 75% of the US economy, just to put in context. By the way, ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, is only 160 billion. That's 1% of what has been spent in, throwing at the virus. And it just gives you an idea of how much more room there is for developed countries, for richer countries to spend more on what would be not only generous, but very smart spending going forward to help the least developed countries. But now, what are we doing in terms of green? Even in these trillions that we've spent, it's only a very small fraction that is deliberately green. Most of the money is being invested and thrown at, jobs and companies and whatever, all the support systems. But basically, what I would call the traditional type of investment, the status quo. Very little is being deliberately green, and a very large part also is being harmful deliberately. It's harmful to the environment. So basically, we are undoing with one hand what we're very strenuously doing with the other hand. So we're not doing great on the green. On the equality, well, the problem is that the crisis itself, we had a bad situation before the pandemic, okay? We had a bad situation in terms of trade. It was flat with all these tensions between the United States and China and everything else, and the United States and Europe and South Korea and what have you, and Japan, etc. So we had a problem before. We had a problem with investment because, insecurity, uncertainty breeds low growth. Why? Through the investment channel, and investment had flattened. The same thing, you did not have productivity growth was very low, if at all. Business dynamism, the so-called churn in terms of jobs and in terms of creation of new companies vis-a-vis the ones that disappeared. And then the question, I repeat, of unequal opportunities, the question of inclusiveness. So that was bad before the pandemic. And then the pandemic struck. And the pandemic has been terrible in terms of inequality. So again, I refer to Harry's point about what do we do about the opportunity now? What do we do about the policies now? So we don't really know how we are going to end up. It depends a lot on the policies that we take, and also because a very, very large part of the world, the larger part of the world, which is the developing world, we still have not taken a very clear position. The only thing that has started now is the question of vaccination. But as Tedros at the WHO said, we don't need 1 billion, we need 11 billion vaccines. Now, but 1 billion is a starter. It's a good way to start. And then maybe with availability and with greater financial support, we will get better. And then the question of resiliency. We were caught with our pants down, absolutely, in terms of our health systems. And that includes the more developed countries in the world. So now, clearly, the question is, we have already rebuilt in this last year, but the question is what to do going forward. And then again, the developing world, the emerging economies, what are we going to do about them? So I think the question is, rather than being optimistic or pessimistic, the question is how to be activistic, how to get on with it, how to start to work towards what we can build a better, do a better future. The digitalization question, which was evoked, for example, is absolutely crucial. What are we going to do about it? Because digitalization can actually produce a lot of lost jobs in the lower part of the workforce, the lower skilled part of the workforce. The question is, how are we going to upskill? How are we going to reskill the working force? So what I see is a lot, Vasil, is a lot of challenges and a lot of question marks, but also I would say very clear paths to action and to policy. And therefore I would say let's get on with it rather than say winners or losers or optimistic or pessimistic. Says, well, we got what we got. We got the situation now. Huge amounts of money, unprecedented amount of money, but been allocated and dedicated to fighting the pandemic. The question now is we got to get a lot more targeted, build resilience, build sustainability, and upskill, build a more inclusive, more sustainable recovery, because we're not doing a very great job so far.
Thank you, Angel. I fully agree with you, and I think it goes back to the point that Alex made, which is what have we learned from this pandemic, from the crisis, and how are we going to rebuild in a better way? And I think about these new policies and ways how we tackle some of the issues. I mean, there have been with us the inequalities, etc., but they have been aggravated by the pandemic. But I would like to move to Harry, and kind of two types of questions. One is about the supply chain and the impact on global trade, etc. We have seen, obviously, especially in the beginning of pandemic, many disruptions to the supply chains. Many countries kind of focusing internally on their own problems. Big issues for the global trade, decrease in the international cross-border investments, etc. A lot of discussion, for example, in the European Union about so-called strategic autonomy as a response to this fragility. What do you think is the status or the situation now, and how can we deal with these issues for the future? And the second issue is, as macroeconomists, what do you think about the growing inflation, and to what degree is this a big issue, or is it something which is a kind of just temporary phenomenon?
You know, it's very interesting about the supply chain, because I not only was a private equity investor in companies that engage in shipping and logistics and supply chain management, but now I'm an advisor to them and deal with investment disputes around them, was that many people in industry, even very senior people in industry, when China went offline because of the pandemic and sort of the world shut down for a moment, and that's being optimistic, all of a sudden executives were finding out that, you know, it's not just a question of the supply chain running, you know, bilaterally, if you will, between China, let's say, and the United States. Rather, what happened over the last 2 or 3 decades is supply chains have become extraordinarily complex and tiered, so that a product that, you know, might have a label made in China on it that comes to US shores, you know, some component, maybe a basic component, is manufactured in China. That then is shipped over to, let's say, Thailand, where an additional component is put on it, more value added, and then it gets shipped maybe to Brazil, where there's more of a finishing of the product, and then it comes to the United States. And so when China went offline, all of a sudden many firms recognized that it's not just because China went offline, but because they were maybe the producer of the first link in that chain, and they realized, oh my God, the supply chains are extraordinarily complex. People in middle management and people who are, you know, working the ropes, they understood this. So I think that has really been an eye-opener for much of industry today. And I think when you combine this issue which I raised and Angel also echoed with the digitalization, I think it really means that supply chains, in order to become more resilient from shocks, whether it's a health shock, whether it's a pure economic shock, whether it's a natural disaster, I think people are beginning to rethink, how can we make these supply chains more resilient? And one of the things that's beginning to happen is adding redundancy into supply chains. It's almost like when a power plant goes offline, you have spare capacity to take care of peak problems. I think what we are beginning to see now in industry is investment in second tier, other types of ways of supplying into the supply chain from places that you might not have ordinarily have thought of as being part of the supply chain. I think with respect to inflation, you know, there's a raging debate here, as many people may know, about whether or not inflation, at least in the United States, where I'm sitting, is going to be a significant problem. Now, I think a lot of people have been surprised at how much pent-up demand there was for products, for services, and as a result of some policy mixes, people are at record levels applying for new jobs and leaving other jobs. But I think what also has been misunderstood is that although there is a rise in prices now, this is a natural part of macroeconomic resiliency. Of you get a blip in demand, but then it settles down to its more stable state. And so, for instance, there was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday or the day before about where lumber prices have gone through the roof from Home Depot and other package stores for building supplies. And people began to buy excess amount of lumber, thinking that they could then resell it by making a profit. All of a sudden, they're realizing that there's excess supply of lumber out there, and lumber prices now are beginning to decline. So I think there is very much an open question about whether these tendencies will result in a stable state of inflation. Inflation does not necessarily just mean a rise in prices. It means a sustained rise in prices, and that it permeates the economy, not just in wages, but in the prices of goods, in the price of utility services and the like. I don't know whether we're going to have a serious inflation bout, but I do have a fair amount of confidence at this point with respect to the Federal Reserve policy, where interest rates are extraordinarily low. So there's ammunition that they could use. The question is, will they overshoot? And that's what the debate is, about whether or not they might raise interest rates too quickly and then force us into a deep recession. But I think this is still very much a painting in progress. And I would tell people who are extraordinarily worried about inflation to take a deep breath and let's just see how things pan out over the next month or so to figure out whether or not this is a sustained change in demand, leading to real rises in prices.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you. And because we don't have much time, we have 3 minutes left. Before I go to Alex, I want to use the question which came via Slido. Basically, I think we can show the question itself. Should companies with fragile balance sheets, even pre-endemic, ride the recovery wave, benefit from the government help? I think I would formulate it in a way, what is the role of governments in this recovery phase? I mean, we have seen many types of responses during the pandemic, especially in the form of providing a lot of liquidity to the markets, monetary easing, different guarantee schemes which were developed for small, medium enterprises to be able to survive. Now, as we are getting out of this situation, of course, with high public debt, deficits, etc., to what degree should governments play a proactive role, maybe in the process itself? We know that we have the recovery and resilience plan, 750 billion coming in the EU, and many other instruments which are coming. So is this the right way? Should it be more, maybe kind of laissez-faire? Alex, how do you see the role of governments in this post-pandemic or recovery phase?
Oh, in 1 minute, Keynes or Adam Smith. Brief answer. I think in the first year, the European Union and the United States, if I may use developed economies, used every club in the bag to get out of this. The European Union did in 4 months what it was not able to do in 4 years during the Euro crisis. Number one, the ECB's PEP program. Number two, the EIB's program from small and medium-sized businesses. Number three, converting the European Stability Mechanism into a health mechanism. Number four, the Commission's share and trust plans. And number five, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, in other words, Next Generation Europe. That was huge, on top of what the member states themselves did. I can just give you an example from the country that I know best. 20 billion euros in excess lending during the first year of the pandemic. And remember, this is a country with an annual budget of roughly 55 billion and with a GDP of roughly a little bit over 200 billion. So I would probably at this stage tone down a little bit the government stimuli packages, especially in the West.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I think we are just on time. Just if we have anybody here in the room who are ready to ask question, please. We don't have any time left. I was just told.
Vasil.
It's very strict. Yes.
Vasil.
Please.
This is Korea. let me just say, Leonard Cohen said, even damnation is poisoned with rainbows. So I would end on a more positive note and say, let's go and find those rainbows together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Harry, Alex. Thank you so much for being with us, all of you who came here and were participating. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to actually ask questions from the auditorium here, all those who were connected virtually. And I think we have certainly a mixed picture, but I believe that we have learned at least something from pandemic, and we'll be able to rebuild the world in a better way, especially in dealing with the inequalities, both among the countries, within the countries, and among the different sectors of economy. So thank you so much, and I wish you a wonderful day to Mexico, to United States, to Finland. Good luck with Russia. As always, difficult.
We're
but
1-0
it's historical.
down. We're 1-0 down, but we'll come back.
Okay, well, it will get better. Thank you all. Have a nice day, and see you at the other sessions we have here in GLOBSEC. Bye-bye.